Hello and welcome to another episode of the Leveraging AI podcast, the podcast that shares practical, ethical ways to leverage AI to improve efficiency, grow your business, and advance your career. This is Isar Metis, your host, and probably the biggest buzzword of AI in 2025 is AI agents. It feels like agents are taking over everything in the AI conversation. Multiple platforms are now allowing you to develop AI agents. Salesforce is focusing now on Agentforce, and even ChatGPT just released their agent tool. And so multiple platforms, multiple people, everybody's talking about AI agents, but the reality is that most people don't even understand what the hell's the difference between agents and traditional large language models, how they work, how to differentiate them from other stuff that's happening. And to be fair, it's not easy because everybody calls everything agents, even when it isn't, because it's a big buzzwords and everybody wants to say that their tool includes agents. What are agents and how can you build them is exactly what we're going to focus on in this episode. So we are going to demystify this whole concept for you. We're going to talk about what agents are and what they're not, and how you can actually build them, but more importantly, how you can build several different agents that talk to one another in a similar way that a team works in your company. So an orchestration of several agents that can actually perform business goals and do specific business tasks and do it consistently and effectively, which is what everybody wants. And so if that's not exciting to you, I'm not sure what will, but it's definitely really exciting to me. Now, our guest today in his early career was a COO of a company, which means he has a deep and solid understanding of business operations. And in this past year, he founded Agentic Brain, which is an AI solution agency that focusing on developing custom AI solutions for companies, a lot of it surrounding agents. So he has this unique combination of understanding business processes together with his personal technical skills, together with the things he's developing for his clients, which makes him understand what actually is needed in a business, makes him the perfect person to walk us through this process. So I'm personally truly excited and humbled to welcome Jake to the show. Jake, welcome to Leveraging AI.
Hey, sorry, thanks for having me. And yeah, great intro there. And I think that already touched on a lot of like very important points of understanding the difference between just typical LLMs and agents. And it's definitely a huge buzzword, and a lot of people will sort of like use them interchangeably, like to them, everything is an agent. And then it's like when you actually look at it, it's really not. And then there's also a lot of, sort of like a strategy and architecture and building effective agents, which is what a lot of people like. Yes, anyone can go and, like build an agent. There's tons of like really cool workflow builders. And to be honest, like just using standard, like the latest, LLMs behind the scenes, they are quite smart, even not just on a base level. But really, there's like a lot of skill and strategy that goes into like actually making them effective and then actually making them, like you said, consistently handle large or complex tasks, which is, really what I want to get into today, because that's something that when you see people, they build something for like YouTube, it's like very simple, easy to explain. It's like a 15-minute build. And I mean, that's great for people that are just getting started and learning, at a base level. But a lot of times, people kind of like will hype that up and be like, oh, this, you can sell this for $10,000 to a company. I built it in 20 minutes. And that's just completely, it's just not true. It's like something you build in 10 minutes is typically not going to be that effective. It's a great starting point, but there's so much more that goes into it. So I'm super excited to share.
Yeah, I'm really excited myself. I'll say one thing. I literally just came back from lunch with a good friend of mine. He's a technical person, very knowledgeable person. And he told me, he knows obviously what I do. And he said, well, I think this whole thing is hyped. I try different things. And yes, I can see the demo and I can see how it's cool. But when I actually try to make it to do the work day to day consistently, it just doesn't work. And I'm like, you're right. If you don't really know what you're doing and you don't invest the time to learn this deeply and troubleshoot it and build it properly, or have somebody else do it for you, that's perfectly fine as well. But don't expect magic. Like you can do magic demos with AI. Doing
Yep.
magic work just doesn't happen. And it still highly efficient, but it's not going to happen in 5 or 10 minutes. It's going to happen in 2 or 3 days or sometimes a week, but then you're going to have a solution that you can use every single day in your business consistently moving forward. And so let's dive right in. Let's start with what the hell are agents and what are the differences between an agent and a large language model?
Sure. Yeah, great question. And in a nutshell, it's like very, very basic nutshell. An LLM is sort of like a question answer sort of AI model. It's think back to the old days of ChatGPT before it had tools because, excuse me, given now, as you said, ChatGPT is becoming quite agentic. They actually have agent mode. It just by default will search the web, run code, whatever. So it's like technically that is an agent because an agent would be like an LLM that can call tools at the very most basic form. So a lot of times why people will confuse them is like they have an AI tool. And so what it does is it's essentially a workflow that maybe it helps you write like, let's say marketing copy or something like that. And so you write, hey, this is my company. I want an email that says this, and that. You click run. And they say, oh, our agent writes it for you. It's not an agent. It's just you're putting an LLM step in there that takes the input, it mixes it with their system prompt, and then gives you some sort of hopefully desirable output. But it's not actually like thinking, planning between tool calls, reasoning. It doesn't have memory. There's a lot of aspects as I'll go into that go into an agent, but at its core, it's just an LLM that can use tools intelligently, and that's what makes it agentic.
Awesome. So I will try to summarize because you touched on a few very important points that are the biggest differences. One, it thinks on its own, right? An agent is not a step-by-step process that you define, but it can decide how to address a problem, right? So it has its own thinking ability. You give it a goal, and then it figures out the steps on how to get there in the most effective way. So this is one. Two, it can use tools. So it can decide when to search, when to do deep research, when to write code, when to summarize things, when to do math. Like it can decide on the different things that it needs to do, and you can give it access to different tools, and tools can be software that you have in your company, which leads to the third thing. It can use memory. It can use its own memory to remember things through the process, and it can use, I'll call it third-party memory, meaning it can pull data from other sources. It can pull data from your CRM. It can pull data from your ERP system. It can pull data from a spreadsheet, like whatever it is that you wanted to pull data from, and then it can use its own memory and make sense in all of that. And the last thing that I will say is that a large language model is a flat one level thing, and an agentic environment can be a multi-layer with an orchestrator and multi-levels of tools, which doesn't happen in a large language model. So these are like the key main things that you touched on one word here, one word there. But really, let's dive in. Let's start looking at the actual thing. And I think looking through an example and then diving in on how it's built will probably is going to be very helpful for everybody to understand.
Cool. Absolutely. Yeah. Let me just pull it up and share my screen here. Give me
Now,
one
we
sec. I
are
have it
going
over
to
on.
show you how to do this in a tool called N8N. So the letter N, the number 8, and then letter N again. It's a tool that really took off completely in the last year and a half, but it's in its essence, in its original essence, it is very similar to Zapier and Make. It's a process automation tool. It's just open source, and it's really flexible because of that. But about I don't know, a year ago, a little less, probably 9 months, they gave the option to build agents within there, which made it extremely powerful and hence drove the attractiveness on this tool to a lot of people. I will say one thing, it's a little more technical. They're learning how to use Make, but once you master that, the options are literally endless. So it's probably worth a steeper learning curve.
Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons that we love it. You can get very technical with it, and we've yet to find a problem, an agent that we haven't been able to use to an end to use to solve that problem. So you can really get very deep with it. Um, Let me know if you can see my screen
I
here.
can.
So this, just to give you kind of like the broad overview of what we'll be looking at, we call this one, we built this for an insurance client that we have, and they wanted essentially, they call it like the CEO agent, but more of like, let's say like executive assistant agent, to handle a lot of back end tasks. So we're not going to get into all of them because like I was saying, that could make this like 6 to 8 hours. But we will get into some of the basic ones here. So at the top, we have the level one manager agent. So this is kind of like the architecture of like how we will build agents behind the scene. So to the client, I mean, they know it's a team of agents, but they just really interact with one agent for the most part. But that agent has these sub agents that can go and perform tasks. And underneath the sub agents, we have tools and workflows. So that's really how we will start off. And it's a good way to go about it, just sort of like building from the ground up rather than building everything from a high level to begin with if it doesn't need to be. Because another large misconception is that everyone thinks that like everything should be solved by agents. And so they, try to sometimes like cut corners and then they'll be like, okay, here's the agent, here's the tool. Okay, now do all of my work for me every day. And like you were saying about your friend, it's like it just doesn't usually end up being quite effective. So it's like you need to build a lot of things are better solved by workflows and maybe workflows with LLM steps in them. And there's nothing wrong with that. And there are also some things that's just like it won't always consistently do the task correctly that you want it to when you just slap an agent on it. So we always start with the tools, like let's build the tool and the workflow. And if it should be a workflow, we'll build a workflow to solve this part of what they want done. And then we give those different workflows and tools to a sub agent. So then, for example, we find it best that it's like each sub agent focuses on one area of what they want done. So for this one, for example, manages their CRM. And then we have one over here that is sort of like the email manager agent. So these are very specific areas that they're focusing on. And under each of these, they have like the email writing agent. These are more of like workflows. But they'll have like tools and workflows within here. But sometimes the workflow will also have agentic parts. So there's like many different levels to it. But essentially, so then we let the CEO agent or the manager agent really focus on like overseeing the task. It knows what all the other agents do, and it doesn't really focus on actually executing actions itself. It's more of like, okay, which agents do I tell to do which parts in which order? And then based on what they return to it, then it decides the next steps. So that's from like a high level how this whole system works.
I'll
Let
pause you
me
just for
go
one
into
second because you touched on a few
yeah.
very important things. One, those of you not watching the screen, I'm going to tell you what's on the screen at any given point. This was just a static flowchart. This wasn't the actual agent tool. And so when you come to design these things, you got to think about, okay, what does it need to do? What does it need to achieve? What tools that it need access to? And you, first of all, design the architecture before you start creating the actual tool. Number two is there's this really important difference that we touched on earlier, but now kind of like reading between the lines with what Jake was saying is important to understand. A workflow is a step-by-step process that you define versus an agent that has a level of autonomy. And there's pros and cons in each and every one of these approaches. A step-by-step process is awesome if it's exactly the same step-by-step process every single time. And so whenever you need one of those things, you can build a process as a tool that the agent can use. And then when it gets into that situation, it will follow the same exact thing every single time, which is important. When you need flexibility, meaning you needed to think, you needed to be more creative, you needed to figure out what to do next, then an agent is more effective. And learning how to mix and match these is what drives what we started with when I did the introduction, effective, consistent results, which without it, you can't actually use it. And so this is a great introduction. So let's dive into the actual tool itself.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great recap there. And that's the reason why sometimes you want to use workflows. Because if you think about it as a company, there's processes that you always want done the same way. You don't want someone to guess every single time on how to do it. But then there's sometimes that you want those processes done in a more dynamic way. You might want someone to write me an email. You might want them to go check your CRM and see what leads haven't been talked to in the past 3 months and have a policy renewal within a month, and then go and pull all their past conversations and call recordings and then write a contextual based email follow up to them. A lot more complex, but at its core, there are, I think a lot of times people will use AI because it's like they don't want to think or they don't want to decide and they want the AI to figure it out for them. And that's just the wrong way to go about it. Like you don't want AI making all the decisions. You leave it too broad and typically you see those unfavorable outcomes. So it's best to have some things that are like hard coded, you might say, of just like this process, we always want it done the same way. But you can call these different processes done in the same way in a dynamic way to achieve different outcomes and goals. So
Perfect.
yeah, great recap there. Um, let me see. Sorry, I can't see which screen I'm sharing here. I gotta
I
switch
see
to
a
another
list
one.
of agents in anything or a list of workflows.
Okay, so you are seeing an AN. Okay, cool. So it will switch automatically. Sorry. Now the screen won't go away. There we go. Okay, so let's start with the main manager agent here, and I can kind of like break it down of how this works. So this is already, I mean, this is just like the base level of the agent that calls the other agents, and you can see it's a little bit more complex than what you'd usually see on YouTube, which would usually just be like this part and then a few tools. And so the reason for that is that there's a lot of typically with any like real world deliverable, there's going to be like a lot of these sort of like data processing and cleaning up steps and just making it like function properly to get the input and output in there correctly. So that's what a lot of these are. We use mainly for communications with agents. We do all of that through Slack. It's a great platform to use it on. Obviously, Salesforce is using that for their agent force, and it works very well. There's a lot that you can do with it, and it makes for a great user experience. And then also Notion for any sort of like dashboard user-facing database uh, parts of the agent. It allows them to easily like update things that they might want to change and sort of see like, any output logs they might want to see, so on and so forth. So what we do is we start off with the user would just essentially message through Slack. We just filter it out to make sure it's, that user's message. We get their user data. And then for this one, because this agent will sometimes have what we call like long running tasks that may take multiple minutes to accomplish, we have it just send a response right away, just saying like, hey, I got your message and, let me process the task and get back with you. And this is, again, something you might not think about until you have someone using it, but it's just like, if the task might take 3 minutes, and they don't get a response back before that 3 minutes, people are just going to keep spamming it and sending all these requests. And then in 3 minutes, they get like, and they're like, oh goodness. And it does the task like 18 times. We just do a little bit, sort of like notify them, hey, got your message. Right here, what we're doing is we're looking for any files. So you can see like JPEGs, PNGs, and then just the regular text from a Slack message, CSVs. So what we do with that is if the user sends any message, because they will sometimes use this for adding like leads to their CRM. So they might snap a picture of a business card, and then we just have it, get the image, use OpenAI to sort of like pull whatever the image is, and then turn that into a normal text, which we can then pass to the CEO agent. And then this part, it has a lot of different inputs here. So this one is specifically for long running tasks. So and we're still building this as well. We've, been working on this agent maybe like 3 or 4 months for this client, and they're, looking long term with AI. So like we're always adding things onto it. So because of that, sometimes it will have these we call, like I was saying, the long running tasks. So what it does is it essentially says, okay, it will output at its first turn and say like, hey, this is going to be a long running task. And it actually will then message the user back right here and just say, hey, this is going to be a long task. I'll get back to you when it's done. And then it re-triggers itself with the task so it can message and then go and complete the task. So the user kind of can understand. It will actually tell it the steps of like, hey, this is a long task. Here are the 10 steps that I have to do to complete this. This might take a few minutes, and it will trigger itself. So that's what this is right here. It's essentially so the agent can re-trigger itself. This one right here is from our reminder workflow. This is super important, and pretty much every client wants this. It's another thing a lot of people don't consider, that it's like AI agents are not like alive perceiving time like you and I. It doesn't just sit here all day waiting for something to do. It activates when it's triggered. So if you just go specifically to an LLM and just say, hey, remind me in 2 days to do this sort of thing, it will say, okay, but it will not do that. It'll just say, yeah, sure, I'll do that. But it doesn't have any perception of time after that. It doesn't know when 2 days has passed. So what we created, and this is one that we put in almost every agent for a client because they will pretty much always want it, is it can actually set reminders for itself. So it says when it should be due and what the actual task is. So when it becomes due, it will actually go through this workflow and trigger itself and say, hey, you set a reminder for this time to do this action. Go ahead and do it. Now's the right time to do it. Super important there. This one comes from their Zoho. And so because it's insurance, they want to know when clients are coming up on their 30, 60, and 90 days from their policy renewal, because that's really when their sort of like sales cycle will kind of like restart for that client. They want to go find them better deals, and they want to keep in touch with that client to ensure that they will renew with them. So it's super important. Zoho has its own like internal, as most CRMs do, like triggers and timers and workflows and stuff like that. However, their workflows I really don't like and they're hard to use. But um, we can have it trigger there. So then essentially that triggers the agent as well. So these are sort of like external triggers that aren't direct messages from the user, but they are important for the agent to receive and then take action upon those. Then for the outputs, this is another thing is, when you're using AI, it's pretty like if you send it a message, it messages you back. And we don't always want that, especially if it's something where it's like a background task. We don't want it to necessarily send a message. Sometimes we just want it to take an action. Like if it's 30 days from a policy renewal, we want it to get all that client's data and write them an email saying, hey, we're looking for better policy options for you. But we don't really, we want then the email agent to message us of like, hey, this is the email, here's the email I'm going to send. So we give it the option to actually continue with no response here if it's like a sort of background task. That's another thing is that some agents, will only act like when you ask them to do something and or some they can also operate just in the background as well. But we don't want it to necessarily message the client every background operation it does because it just gets annoying and spammy and they'll see the action is completed. They don't need to see it and be told. Um, and then right here, so we already went over the long task, so it can say, hey, this is a long task. And then what we do here is we have it either send or update messages. This is another cool thing that you can do with Slack, and it makes it just like a cleaner user experience. So it will say, hey, I'm right here. Hey, I'm getting started. I got your message. Let me get started on the task. And then over here, it takes that same message and updates it to just say, hey, here's the completion of the task, or here's the results that I got back.
So
Um,
I want to pause you just for 1 second,
yeah.
because there are really three main key components, and we touched on two of them, even though it was a very long, detailed one. One of them is inputs, like the agent gets inputs, right? It gets, and in this particular case, you touched on a lot of inputs. Some of it is our inputs that in this case are coming in through Slack. I want you to do 1, 2, 3, 4. Some of them are inputs from different systems, such as CRM. Some of them are inputs from the output of the agent. And that sounds a little meta, but that's the way it is. Like the agent did something, it's like, oh, this triggers something else. So go and put this as another input to the agent. So these are the inputs. The outputs could be anything you want. The output could be a message back to the user. It could be taking action in a system, could be updating another agent, could be many different things. So the output could be either a task or a message or an update of a different platform. And in the middle, which is the part that we're going to get to right now, is the actual agent itself, meaning what does the agent do to take the data from the various inputs that it gets and turn it into the outputs that we need. And so let's dive into, I assume, I don't want to, I'm not trying to lead
Yeah.
you here. I assume that's the next step.
Yep. Yeah, no, you're spot on. Yeah, great recap there. That's yeah, there's a lot of different ways that they can be input to and output and also, one of the kind of like challenges is sort of like making them think like a human, like having stuff like memory, knowing when to do stuff, setting tasks for themselves because like as humans, that's just like normal. It's like you don't really think about, oh, I'm setting a task for myself to do on Tuesday. You just think on Tuesday I have to take my
Yeah.
dog to the groomer or whatever. So now we can get into this, and you can see this is quite a long and detailed prompt. So I won't, necessarily read every single word of it, and I can just explain more at a conceptual level. But this is another very important thing that people quite often overlook. Typically, you'll see someone's prompt is like this long, okay, and it's like two sentences and just a very broad, vague description of kind of what they want it to do. And so there's some really important parts that you should have in your prompt. And this is actually like, this is all backed up by like research by like Anthropic, OpenAI, Google. Like this is just a good way to prompt an agent. And it makes sense because it's like you want to write things out clearly and break them up into different sections. So how we do this is we write things in Markdown. We use different delimiters so it can understand the different parts of the prompt because if you just mash everything together and you just write like usually we try to avoid sections like these, but I will put it in role and objectives because this is just like a high level overview of what it's doing. But it's best to like we use like bulleted lists and let's see if we have any step by step. Yeah, like numbered processes as well. So it's like these are all very important. So what we start off with is role and objectives. So this is kind of like a high level overview of like this is what you typically should be doing. This is the type of actions that you perform. This is why you're doing them. This is the outcome that we want. So very high level overview. Usually people stop at this and think that that's enough, and it just is not. Like AI can do a million things, but it only does exactly what it's told. Like it tries to do exactly what you say. It's like if you're talking to someone and they take everything you say literally, and you're like, oh, that's so annoying. Like, come on, use your skills and infer stuff. AI, it's getting better at that for sure, but it will still try to do what you say kind of literally. So you have to describe things like you have to be exact. And that's one of the things that we see people are not very good with, especially when we start with clients. They'll be like, oh, well, I just kind of, I want it to like write me marketing emails. And you're like, okay, but like, what's your process? Who do they go to? What should be the content? Where do you get the content? Who writes these? What's your strategy to write them? There's a million little details that go into it, but a lot of times people are not so good at like breaking down and being specific on what they actually want. So from role and objectives, now we have a subsection under here about the core capabilities, and this is sort of like this is how it does the task delegation. It leads the team of other agents. One of them is a CRM manager. One of them handles emails. It can also do cross-platform research to read emails and CRM data to make decisions. Goes into the decision making and then user alignment as well, just to kind of say like, hey, before you do like irreversible actions or like add or update leads or something, check with the user always. This is another thing that is very important to add. We never just let an agent loose into a company on the first go. We always add human in the loop and then a testing period. And we try to make it as transparent as possible, which is why we love using Slack. Because if they're already in Slack and they see that the agent is like, hey, I'm going to do this. Hey, I noticed this, so therefore I'm going to do this. And they become more comfortable to the point where, after a couple months of that, typically then they'll be like, okay, put at least these parts on autopilot. Like I know it's going to do those. It always does them right. I have confidence in it, but that's very important to let clients know like what is actually going on. And yeah, just let them have their input on it as well, because it won't always get everything right on the first go.
I want to pause you just for 1 second because it's a very
Mhm.
important point. When you're developing these things, the expectation should be it is not going to work properly the first time or the second time or the fifth time. On the 20th time, it's going to work okay 90% of the time, which for some of the tasks is fine. And for some of the tasks, it's unacceptable. It just depends what the task is. And the way to solve this is by testing it with live environments, meaning letting it run on actual data and then seeing what it actually does. Now, to make sure, like Jake said, it's not creating havoc and trashing your best clients, is to put a stop point that lets a human check what they're about to do. And you could do this in Slack. I'm doing this as well with like tasks. So you can open a task in Notion or in Jira, Asana, ClickUp, Monday, whatever it is that you're using for task management, you can open a task. And until the user closes the task or confirms like whatever the thing is that it needs to do, until that, the agent won't move forward. And that's your way to increase your level of control and understanding of what the agent actually does. Then you go and fix it, you do it again, you go fix it, you do it again. Like Jake said, until you get to the point like, okay, I don't need to check this thing. It's correct every single time. It's just wasting my time. The other thing that it does, doing it in Slack or in your task management platform, is that it's just another person on the team, right? That tells you what they're doing and updating you regularly. And what I tell people all the time is that building an agent, or in general using these models, is like having the best intern on the planet. It is going to do exactly what you tell them. However, if you don't give them all the information and you don't explain to them exactly how to do the thing you want them to do, don't expect them to do the task properly because they're still an intern. And so this is the approach, right? If you're going to break it down step by step and give them all the information, just like we would give a person to do the task when they don't know anything about the company or you or the process or the project or the tools or whatever, give them the time, the resources that you would have given a person. They will do the task amazingly well. And they take feedback amazingly well. And so let's continue. So I sorry I broke you up, but this was a very important point. So you said if you can scroll up, we started with a
Yes.
general kind of like task setup. So that was, you called it
Yep.
role and objectives.
Rolling up.
The second thing
Yep.
was your core capabilities. So these are the things that you can do with a bullet point that describes each and every one of the things. What is the third
Mhm.
component?
So then the third component is we have for this one goal, and These are not, I want to go into like, these are not, we don't always start with like, oh, you must have goal, you must have role and objective, so on and so forth. We really like every prompt is built differently and it should extend based on how complex the task is. And it should be a very iterative process. So it's like sometimes I'll put goal and role and objective. Sometimes that doesn't need to be clarified. But when we're doing something like the manager agent, as you can imagine, has the most extensive prompt. And then the sub agents are a little bit less. And then the agents within workflows or tools and stuff are even less and more specific. So these are not like hard set things of like, you must have this or the prompt will not work. You really build the prompt around the task and doing it in sort of like an iterative testing phase. And this is what a lot of people get wrong. They use AI for it. And not that AI couldn't write a good prompt, but there's one specific reason why AI is typically not as good at writing prompts as humans is because it doesn't go and test them. It just says, hey, here's a whole bunch of fluff. Here's like 18 paragraphs going over everything that it could do. And when you do something like that and you paste it in, you don't really know what's working and what's not working. And you also don't know how to change it because you don't know at what point it started to go off track. So it's really best to start with like just the very basic things. Like just give it like a one sentence role when you start and then like a one sentence goal. And then rules, I always just add as it does things wrong. Like that's the reason I add rules. Unless I know like this is something that AI always gets wrong or just some like rule of thumb best things to add in there. I just add these as it makes mistakes. I write all of my prompts by hand. Like I write each word in them. Sometimes when I'm done with it, it might be like maybe a little messy. So I might send it to AI and just say, hey, format this better for me. But the most I ever put in from AI is maybe like one line. Like let's say I try to explain something that is kind of a simple concept, but maybe when I write it out, it comes about this long because, when people write, they're just like writing as they think. And I go, can you make this more concise and clear? And then if I read it back, I'm like, that's good. I might paste it in. But what I never do is be like, write this entire section because it's just guessing on what it should do, what might go wrong, what the rules should be. So I highly recommend that you don't use AI to prompt, especially if you're like an absolute master at it and you built your own agent to write prompts just how you'd write them and so on and so forth. Sure, I'm sure that there are people that are really that good, but it's like I write all of it by hand and I recommend people do it too. It's a good thinking exercise and it's a good learning exercise. And if you always use AI to do it, you just won't get better at it. And that's why a lot of people struggle at these sorts of things because they never actually learn. They're just, oh, AI do it for me. They don't know what's good about it, bad about it. Anyways, the next step is rules. And then I break these down into subsections. So again, rules, bulleted list. And a lot of times these are, like I said, they're written because it messes up. And then I say, okay, do this because it's screwed up on that. So that's the reasoning for rules. I break them down into subsections based on like, oh, the workflow, communication, emails, how to use tools. I think that there's one planning and reflection, um, reasoning strategy as well. So I guess this is under workflow processes. Um, but this is another thing. So then when we have exact processes, because the cool thing, we were kind of talking about it before, when you have hard set workflows, sometimes you want things always done a certain way. When you use an agent, it's almost like an AI build your own workflow because it has all these tools, depending on which order it's using them. Every time you run it, it can build its own workflow. That's what's really cool and useful about it and makes it more similar to a human. However, there are some times that it's like you want to tell it, like, always do these things in these order. Like, don't go and send an email before looking up data about the client because then you'll have no context on them. You would think that's obvious. It's obvious to a human. It's not obvious to an AI unless you specifically tell it exactly what you want to do. Also, explaining reasoning strategy. Things like plan extensively before each function or tool call, take a moment to outline the steps, and then always like think between using tool steps. Because sometimes another thing a lot of people don't think about, it will just run tool after tool and not really think about the returned inputs and try and do all the thinking at the end. You can actually change this by telling it, like, think between the tool steps and then make the next decision. These are actually outlined in an OpenAI paper about the 4.1 models because it will follow prompts a little bit more literally than the previous models, which would kind of try to infer more. And you can actually get a 20% better result when you explain the reasoning steps and use this part here. And then there's another part at the end here. Just telling it you're an agent, keep going until the user's query is completely resolved or before ending your turn and yielding back to the user. By using this and then a reasoning step, and then there's also one other one, which I don't think was necessary in here about like reviewing data, or it may actually be in tool usage. But using those, you'll just naturally get about a 20% better result from it just by reminding it of these sorts of things. And so it's really interesting because a lot of people don't, they wouldn't think deep enough to think, I need to explain a reasoning thinking process to get it to think like me and do things like me, but it really significantly improves the result. Next, we have steps. So this is still under workflow processes. So steps for researching a person, CRM and email. So again, we want them to always look in the CRM. We want them to want it to search for recent emails. And then we want it to review these and then see another thing that it does in the background is look for any missing data on that person. And if it can find that missing data, like their email or their address or their LinkedIn or something, if it can find it in an email from them, it will actually go in autonomously add that to the CRM. Then it compiles a summary. So this is also important. A lot of things, if I'm sure that you've heard of it, maybe not a lot of other people have, depending on how much they build agents, but the sort of like context engineering of like, you can't just, there's usually two sides. People give it like a one sentence instruction and it's not very clear, or they just dump everything they can possibly imagine into it. And either of those is a great strategy. If you overload its context window, they just naturally like, yes, it might have a million token context window. That doesn't mean it will process all of that properly. AI tends to skip over a lot of parts. So you want to only give it really the necessary data. So when we do, especially in subagents, we kind of have it like summarize the data and then pass it onwards. It helps preserve its context window. Next, we go into the tools section. This is very important to explain. We give in here like a broad overview of what they do, and then it's best for structure to explain more in here, which I don't know if this one, yeah, so this one is pretty good. So this has like a more detailed explanation of how to use the tool, what the tool can do, sometimes when to use it, depending on,
Well, I want to
what the
pause just
tool.
for 1 second for the people who are not watching the screen.
Sure. Yep.
For each of the agents in every tool you use, it doesn't matter whether they're using NA10 or something else to build the agent had a section of the tools it has access to. You're literally connecting a line and giving it access to different tools. A tool could be a CRM, a tool could be something you build. So a process that you build, it's something that the agent can use to achieve the goal that it was given. And so what Jake is showing right now, he's saying that on the high level agent, in the actual prompt of the agent, when it's describing to the agent what it can and cannot do, it's giving it a short description of the tool. Inside the tool itself, there's a much longer description of the tool, which makes perfect sense, right? Because you want think about it just like Jake mentioned, think about the CEO. The CEO doesn't necessarily need to know exactly how to do each function in the company. It needs to know the function exists. It needs to know what the function does. It doesn't need to know how to do the thing. But the guy that creates the reports from the ERP to the inventory manager needs to know very, very well how to do this one very specific thing, where you're going to define that tool in much more detail. In this particular case, this could be a Zoho CRM data query, which is what we're seeing right now. So that part has to be very, very detailed. But on the high level agent, the CEO agent, the orchestrator agent, you just tell it that it has that functionality.
Exactly. Yeah, you summed it up very well. And in kind of like a way to think about it in sort of a human level is think if you're given you're an intern, you just joined the company, they give you this long list. Here's all the things that you do, here's the processes, they have it all documented. You're not gonna every time you go to do a task, read the entire thing and remember each step and whatever. You're gonna look for that section. Oh, I gotta update the CRM. Let me find that section. Okay, I need to use this tool. Let me go read how to use the tool. And that's kind of in a nutshell, AI doesn't think exactly like humans, but kind of like it pays attention to different parts depending on what it's doing. So that's why the structure of the prompt is extremely important. And, it will pay attention to different parts of it depending on what it's doing. So you want to break it down granularly and you hit it right, the nail right on the head that, you give it a very brief explanation of how the tool works and then in the prompt. And it's also important to keep the naming the same. So don't call this one like Zoho tool and then it's just the other one is like CRM managing workflow or something like that. Like I always will name them this sort of way and then reflect the name exactly within the prompt so it knows it, be very specific and exact when you're speaking to an AI. So very high level overview. When you go into the tool, it makes more sense, give all the details there because it doesn't necessarily need all the steps to use it every time. If it's doing an email managing task, it doesn't need to know all the steps that it's the Zoho managing agent does in here. Lastly, we have vector stores. So this is if you have external databases, vector stores, anything like that, that it might need to reference, kind of just tell it, we just tell it like, this is what's contained in here. And a really cool thing that we've done, well, we do for a lot of managing agents, but this one as well, is that it actually has like a shared memory where all the agents will output to a database in Supabase, and they'll kind of like write down like, here's what the input was. Sometimes it's reasoning steps and then the output. So this makes it like a whole unified team because if they each have their own separate memory, they won't always know like what was actually done. They just know user input, output. That's it. And that's a lot of times not enough context, especially in multi-agent systems. So by giving them like a shared memory, it's like having a group chat. Imagine like if you're trying to coordinate something with your team at work, if it's all one-on-one conversations, no one knows what's going on. If you do it all in the group chat, everyone kind of stays on board and they're like, oh, and if they don't know what's going on, just go and check. So we do that here. You can also use this as like more of like a structured query database rather than like RAG, which is, depends on what the use case is, but there's different ways to query this, but that is essentially like the gist behind why we do that.
I'm gonna
Then at
pause you
the
just for
end,
1 second for the people who
yeah,
get diarrhea when they hear the word database or Supabase
sorry.
or vector store. So you don't have to worry about it. Like it sounds very technical, but the reality is the tools today became really, really simple. Like literally, if you go to Supabase, which is one of the most commonly used tools in these worlds, it's a database tool, and you can set up a new database and give it a name, and that's more or less everything you need to know. And from that moment on, the agent, or in this particular case, all the agents can call that database, which is just a storage. It's a container of information where they can all save information to, and you tell them what information to save. So when you take an action, announce it to the database. When you post something to the CRM, put it in the database. Like you tell them what to save. And it's called a vector store because these AI databases are built on vector information. So basically, it's like a length and a direction. But again, you don't need to know all of that. You just need to know there's a container that saves information and saves data that all the tools have, that all the agents and all the tools have access to. And that's their way to collaborate and have a unified knowledge of what's going on across the different processes.
Absolutely. And in a nutshell, there's two ways that databases are commonly used for agents. And one is just their like chat memory. So like maybe the past 10 things that were said. And then the other one would be the vector database. And usually that's when people say, I trained an AI to do something, usually what they mean is they uploaded all this information to a vector database. And it's just like, imagine having like a user manual for something. You can go in there and look up any data when you want to. So there's like chat memory and then here's all the data that you can look up if you need it. And that's how those two will typically operate and why they're a little bit different there. Then at the end here, this is super effective and important. The AI models will pay attention to the things at the top and bottom the most, and I believe bottom a little bit more than top. So when you have a very long prompt that it might kind of like skip over things on, it's really good to give it a recap. And again, I do this iteratively of like the things that it might forget or is not doing well that you're like, it's in the prompt, it's just not doing it. Just restate it at the end because the more times that it appears in the prompt, the more that it will adhere to that instruction. And also, if it's at the end, it pays more attention to the end and it just makes it that much more effective. For this one, it follows the instructions very well, largely because they're, well written, well structured and everything. So the thing I put at the end is from the OpenAI paper about, how it's an agent and keep going until the user's task is complete. The AI models, they just understand what agents and agentic frameworks are. And so then it just thinks more like an agent rather than like you send me a question, I send you an answer sort of thing. It just makes it perform better. So that is how this main agent works here. I can definitely go into maybe a sub agent now, or I could even show like sort of how the outputs look like in a user experience sort of way from Slack.
So we're short on time. I want us to do two things very quickly. One, let's
Sure.
open just one of the sub agents, just people see what it looks like. And basically, if you think about it, a sub-agent is kind of like a tool for the main agent. And then you can go as many layers deep as you want. Or a process could be a tool for an agent and so on. So you can see now that Jake opened a sub-agent, it has a lot less stuff. So let's just go over the components that this is connected to so people understand. And then maybe we'll look at one run and see how the output looks like. And I think that's going to be awesome.
Sure. Yeah, for this one, so yeah, it is much simpler, and one of the reasons for that is because its input is just directly, it's just a natural language string from the manager agent. We don't have to worry about processing the data from Slack, having it reply, so on and so forth. So what this one does is we actually use some different MCP servers here. These ones are more of like workflow ones that we had to build different steps into. These ones are more like direct actions of like getting deals, leads, many leads, accounts, and contacts from their CRM. And then it also has, so the Postgres chat memory here is the database, like I was saying, where it's just the chat memory, like it has, this many messages that happened, helps keep it on track a lot more. And then, as you can see for the prompt, it's structured very much similarly to the other one. We have like more step-by-step processes in here, explain all the different tools, so on and so forth, and how to do different processes in here. But yeah, this one is mainly focused because it doesn't need to know all the instructions of everything. It's really just focused on like, here's how you complete the queries that will go to you. Here's the tools that you have available. Here's how you would use them. Also using the think tool is quite useful as well. It's, allows it to kind of have like a sort of like a scratch pad where it can just like put down thoughts and kind of like reason through them. And it helps it think better through longer or more complex tasks that might take many different steps. So
I'll
that
add one
is,
small thing. First of all, great recap of what the sub-agents do. You touched on MCP servers. MCP servers are the ultimate AI connectors, and they basically are built either by the companies themselves or by third parties, and they're exposing the functionality of a tool, in this particular case, Zoho, but this could have been Salesforce, ERP, email platforms, knowledge graphs, social media network, like whatever has an API that connects to it, it exposes it to an AI in a very, very simple way. So instead of having to develop APIs for weeks with a team of 10 people, you write 4 to 10 lines of code and you have access to everything that that tool has to offer. So when Jake is saying I connected MCP servers to provide me information or take actions in Zoho, what he means is that they've connected specific functionality from that into this agent, which again sounds really, really complicated, but it's a lot easier than you think because that's what MCP does. It makes it very easily accessible. And then in simple English, you can tell the agent, hey, I need you to go and do this. And it knows how to go and grab that function from the MCP. And then it knows how to call, in this particular case, Zoho, and say, hey, I need to know all the new leads that came in the last 24 hours. And then it just works without you having to figure out what's actually happening in the back end.
yeah, it makes these things very quick and easy to develop too. You just simply go, you make your MCP server, you throw all the tools in it, and it, yeah, makes it very easy to spin these things up very quickly. One more, I can show sort of like a
Let's
demonstration
see
here.
how
Let
this
me,
looks like on the Slack channel. So
yeah,
people understand what the output looks like after all this detailed work.
let me go into here. Okay, Slack. Okay, do you see Slack now?
Yes.
So what we have here, this is kind of like this is another one that we're working on, but this is kind of like a manager agent here that has a whole bunch of different sub agents. Joe named it Jarvis for this one. But these are sort of like the functions of how the different agents would interact with the user. For example, he says, hey, can you look for information on himself? So it's going to go ahead and look through the CRM. It says, hey, here's the CRM summary. I also looked for all the emails from him as well, and then ask the user what they would like it to do next. So for sometimes we use structured. Another really cool thing that you can do is use Slack blocks, which I'll give a visual demonstration of in a second. A lot of times, some agents we use like unstructured text like this because it can be so dynamic, but other ones that are focused on a very specific task. This one, for example. So this one is the email managing agent, which is under the sub agent. So again, like I was saying, sometimes if it's just like, hey, I know that I should write an email to this person, we don't need Jarvis to tell us and then the email agent to tell us. It's just duplicate. So then Jarvis would choose, hey, email agent has it. I don't need to respond. Then the email agent would send this. So it's just like, hey, this is the email that came in, and then here's the new one that I'm going to send based on that. So then we have it referencing past emails, so it knows exactly how to write those, knows what's going on. And then to make it very easy, because it's like you can have sometimes to keep it better on track, especially for clients, because it's like in your mind, you might know exactly all the 8,000 things that this agent does, but a client does not. So sometimes it just makes it easier to just like, these are your 4 options and just give them some buttons because it's like they either want to send it, draft it, to be rewritten, or just decline it in general. So it's very useful to kind of just give them those direct options.
Yeah,
You
for,
can
for
do
people
this
to
using
understand
Slack
the way you
box.
do this, you build, and again, now we're getting way too technical, but you build a Slack tool that has these functions that then connects in the back end to the functions in the AI agent. So that's how these two universes interact. Jake,
Yep.
this was fantastic, very detailed. And I want to do a very quick recap, and then I want to let people know where they can find you. So agents are awesome, especially when you combine them with structured processes and the right data sources and the right tools. And that's the way to actually make them work. And what Jake showed you literally openly, which is incredible because it's work he actually does for his clients, is how to think about it. So how to create the architecture, how to build the layers of the different things, what kind of tools you need to think about, how to connect them, and what are the actual prompt structures of a master agent, and then the smaller tools level or specific operations level agents. And then we showed you a very quick example on how that can work while connecting it into Slack as the way to communicate as the, if you want, the front end, the user interface for these agents. So the users don't need to know any of this. The end user just sees a Slack channel and they talk to the Slack just like it's a person, and they can communicate back and forth. So again, incredible, incredible work. This is extremely helpful for people. By the way, I don't expect anybody after listening to this podcast to be an agent ninja, but it gives you a very good idea of what it takes to actually develop an agent. And then you can call somebody like Jake to actually build it for you, but you will have a much easier work of explaining what you actually need, which is a big, important part. So Jake, if people want to learn more about your work, work with you, follow you, see your content, what are the best ways to do that?
Yeah, so definitely I can connect with me on my LinkedIn. Hopefully you can just drop a link in the description,
That's going to be
or you
there.
can just search for me by name. And then also at my website, which is just agenticbrain.com, which is spelled right here.
Awesome. Really, really great. I really appreciate you, appreciate what you're doing, appreciate the content you're sharing, and keep on doing the hard work. And for everybody listening, if you want to learn more about agents, we have several other episodes on several other platforms that are not NA10, so they can broaden your horizons, but they all follow the same exact concept that Jake beautifully laid in front of us. So thanks again, Jake. I'll see you around. Thanks everybody for listening.
Thanks for having me.